So, welcome Michelle Hutton, CEO for Edelman Australia and also the Chief Growth Officer Asia Pacific. We are sitting here in this beautiful room set in one of our IKEA stores, and we're going to have some interesting conversation around trust, leadership, and how the recent challenges have kind of influenced the trust and the leadership for the future. For 20 years, you have been running, more than 20 years, been running a kind of a trust survey, trust report. Mm-hmm. And the recent one that has just been released by Edelman, what are some of the big key takeouts from there that you can see?
Yeah, it's a fascinating survey that we do, because we go out and talk to people about who they trust and why they trust certain institutions. So we ask them a range of questions around, do people trust business, government, media and not-for-profits to do the right thing? And because we have been doing it now for so many years, we've been able to track how people's views around trust have changed. And I think one thing that we've learned over those years is that trust is really fragile. It can be very easily won, but really quick and easy to lose as well. And I think especially when going through a crisis like we have been this year, I think we've seen great examples of particularly political leaders who have earned trust very quickly, but equally can lose trust, very quickly as well. But when we did our last study here in Australia, Australia as a country, we've been in a state of distrust now for a really long time. And, some people might argue, well, that perhaps is a bit of the Australian Australian psyche, Australian culture, but we have been quite sceptical about business and government leaders, and we've been asking some pretty tough questions of them. When we went into market just after Christmas, what was really interesting was that we had this massive gap between the informed population in Australia and then the general population. There were people who were probably in that more informed group saying, actually, things are okay. I'm pretty happy with my life, with my future prosperity for myself and my family. Whereas the general population were the group saying, actually, I'm a little fearful. I'm not so sure. But we actually went back into market with our study after the bushfires because we thought it was just such a momentous event here in Australia. So we went back and spoke to Australians, and what was really interesting was that informed group who were feeling okay suddenly then said, oh, actually, I now see that things aren't so great. So this gap, the trust gap in Australia, closed almost overnight. I think it's a really important time for us as a nation to be asking leaders to really step up and help us come out of this. And how are we going to recover, and what do we want this nation to be, and how can issues like the environment and climate change actually be an opportunity for us to rally around and rebuild and rediscover what this country can be.
I think this question also, I really love your report, because it's a trust report, and I think that if there's lack of trust or no trust, I think it's almost basically impossible to drive any genuine change that can last for a long time. You can force things, but it will, if the trust base is not there. And I think both of us that are also working in industries and so forth know that the trust part is so important there. And I think also the trust is the way that we kind of check the trust part is what is the actions, what are the true behaviors that's coming out. And I sometimes think also that from a trust part, I mean, if we go back again as human beings, as we talked about before, I think deep inside of us, we know when we meet people, we quite quickly put on our own internal trust barometer to check, is this a person that is I can kind of trust and to want to continue to have a conversation with or not. And I think also that we need to go back when making decisions to really be able to use the values that we have, and then from there on also make the decisions for the future. And it's interesting to see that with all of the challenges that we see now around in society, it's almost, I view it as a stress test also of the setup and what we have built up. But of course now the conversation starts to turn more into what is that we want to build back better. What are the things that we see where there may be cracks and where the trust is not really there, or things are not, processes are not, maybe not really working. And I can directly relate that to IKEA and our operations. In one way, a crisis, you can also view it as a gift, because it will really kind of test yourself as an individual, the team, and your total kind of business model, and to see, where is it that we thought it was working fine and good, but it's actually not, and then to say that now we have discovered something that we can actually also change.
So true. And one of the things that we've found in the study is that there are, ultimately two key drivers of trust, particularly in business. One is competence and the other is ethics. And, typically, organizations focus on one and not the other. But I think if more and more leaders can think about, okay, I've got to run a competent business, I've got to be able to deliver quality goods and services and deliver to shareholders and deliver to our customers. But equally, I think the more that we can lean into, but what about the ethical question? And to your point around trust building, it's, what's our greater purpose as an organisation and as a company, and what can we be doing to really crystallise the why and make that a galvanising proposition for the people who work for us, the people who want to buy from us, and the people who want to do business with us. I think that can be really, really powerful.
And I wanted to go back to you mentioned there also the climate crisis that we have and so on, and also in your reports there were questions into this direction, because we did ourselves within IKEA also just recently kind of a global survey around what people think about sustainability, climate change, and so on. And we could also see that there was movements in there, specifically here in Australia, that was directly correlated to the bushfires and so on. And from the trust report, that there what are some of the insights there around the understanding and around the climate change and the climate change agenda and the need for change?
Well, we asked people what they were concerned about. We said we asked them a series of questions to try and unpack, what was really underlying some of these trust fears that people had at the time. And the number one issue was climate change and the environment and the lack of action here in Australia. Everyone we spoke to, it didn't matter gender, age, where they lived, it was by far the number one issue that people said was worrying for them. And people, I think, are genuinely concerned about where we are on our pathway around climate action and change here in this country. I think people are sick of the political infighting. I think people are sick of having conflict around what should be a really simple strategy for us as a country. And personally, I think that we're a country of great innovation. We always have been, and we've come out of crises before, thinking big and thinking differently. If you think about, there's been so much digital innovation in this country in a very short period of time, thanks to the pandemic. What could we do equally if we put those efforts into the climate challenge, and to think differently about how we might create new jobs, create new businesses, and create new policies that's going to really impact and affect change. That's what people want. That's what people are asking for.
And I make also a quite a connection with the pandemic and climate change and the bushfires. I think we understand the drought, the bushfires, and that is directly related to changes in the climate, and it gives
Absolutely.
really combustible kind of situations and so forth. But I can also see that there is a link with health and climate change. If we not specifically just the COVID-19, but we know that when climate zones, if they start to change, it affects what you can grow in that area that you maybe have for hundreds of years been growing a certain type of crop. Suddenly the conditions change, and that then you cannot grow the crops that you normally do. But with climate change, with those climate zones changing, it also affects where disease can come in and appear and so on.
Totally.
If you think about for example, malaria and things like this, that is, we think about just in the kind of tropical areas and so on. But of course, if climate is changing and the climate zones also move, then of course it has a big impact also from a health perspective and what type of diseases and so forth that will come forward. And so I also, in this challenging times that we are right now with the COVID-19, I think it's more important than ever to kind of, for us also, both as businesses, but also within communities and as private citizens and so, to start to kind of take kind of a measurements on what are the really important things here for us as a society, not just about tomorrow, but really about the future.
I totally agree. I think partnerships is key, and I think that without partnerships we probably won't achieve what we all want to achieve. In fact, that was something that came through our study, was that we know now that if businesses partner with government, with media and with not-for-profits, we will rebuild trust in the system as well. That's what people are looking for. And I think what you're doing is extraordinary. How can you get more businesses to do what you're doing?
No, from an IKEA perspective, right now we have also realized that it's time for us to open up even more. I believe we have been doing and are doing constantly really great and fantastic things, and making a lot of good progress, and driving with innovation, investing in better operations, really striving for a carbon neutral society. But it's time now also for us to not only to work with ourselves, but to open up, and we are really on the quest now to find like-minded companies, organizations that share the same values and a positive direction for the future. And I think that's definitely something that excites me about the pathway forward.
Well, it excites me as well. I think it's extraordinary what you're doing, and I think the fact that you've done so much, you've acted, you haven't just gone out and communicated, I think is really important and powerful. And I hope that there are other business leaders out there like you that share your vision and excitement. I think that what you're doing is extraordinary, and I think your business allows us as individuals to make that small difference, to think about the types of companies that we want to buy products and services for. I mean, that's how these movements will happen. That's how change will happen.
And I have a belief also that we are sitting on an amazing potential here in total Australia when it comes with the climate change and what is needed. If we think about it, we are in one of the most fortunate countries when it comes with an abundance of sun. And of course, as a Finn, love to be here. It's summer for me every single day, although for Australians sometimes it's a little bit too chilly, but for me it's just a normal Finnish summer day, So I'm thinking specifically around all the solar technology. Because if we look back 10, 15, 20 years ago, when solar panels started to really to come out on the market, and individuals also could invest into it, a lot has happened when it comes with the technology and how you operate it and how you integrate it, the battery technologies and the whole setup. And that also, like you mentioned before, Michelle, the innovative genes that we have here in Australia, with technology and IT and so forth, that's a totally industry that we could actually be world leading within.
Absolutely.
And we could really become a innovation hub here in Australia for all of the technologies around clean energy.
Yeah.
Then I realize, of course, that we are in a let's say a little bit battle uphill, if I say it in a kind way, with all the abundance of fossil fuels and so forth that we have here, and it's about money and profits within that part. But here I think it comes back into then again where we as individuals can demand certain things, where we as businesses also can actually stand on the forefront and say, what is it that we would like to lead? What's the future that we want to lead our businesses and the communities towards? And I think that's going to be very important in this change. And again, it's almost like a perfect step-by-step approach with change management. It starts with awareness, create the interest, and then it's the trial period, and then finally we will adopt and understand that this is the right thing to do.
And it is the right thing to do. And your point around the younger generation earlier, I think, is a really important one, because they're the ones pushing for change.
Definitely.
We've made all the mistakes.
Yes, yes, and they have to inherit it.
They do, and I think a lot is resting on their shoulders now, right, as a generation, to come through with new ideas and with creative thinking around how we solve some of these big challenges. I hope that they prove us wrong, and we look back and think, thank God they came in and fixed what might have not been such a big challenge after all. Let's hope.
So Michelle, what do you think then from a leadership perspective, and is there anything from the trust report that came forward there? What's the expectations on leaders and business leaders and businesses in general that's coming from the survey?
I think firstly, the expectation of leaders has never been higher. People who work for companies now are actually looking to their leaders for information like never before. In fact, during the pandemic, we did some pulse surveys in various countries around the world, and what we found was that we were actually facing at many times through the pandemic an infodemic, meaning there was just so much information coming at us. And so people now become really reliant on the companies that they work for to give them really simple, clear information about the pandemic, but other aspects in life as well. So I think leaders have to start at home first and understand that they have an obligation to, work with their teams and their people. I think the second really important theme that came through the study is that leaders now have to go over and above and drive proper action around issues that are bigger than their business. And it's not just about communicating a plan, it's about showing real change and real action and being brave enough to be able to encourage others to be a part of that as well. And I think lastly, this expectation around partnership, people aren't expecting leaders to work in a vacuum. People are expecting leaders to work in coalitions and to find like-minded people and create a call for action. I think that's what leaders now need to do more than ever. It's show us the path forward and create a movement That's what people want. That's what we need. And I hope leaders will step up and deliver.
I think an important ingredient will also be from a leadership to be able to dare to show the vulnerability.
Totally.
And it's like leading with the heart in front
Cannot
of you,
agree more.
and to be and I think that also drives different type of decision making. It's about being brave enough to also to go outside of the safe path, to search for what is outside there, beyond the core business, and to be able to, and that means taking risk.
Yeah.
I think this is
And making mistakes.
yeah, making mistakes, and then
Yeah.
to also to be up there and saying, yeah, I was wrong,
Yep.
and so on. And I think that is also part of building that trust that we really need to get there.
Great.
It's not about hiding anything. It's not about kind of avoiding. It's about saying this is what I believe is the right way for us to go. But if something goes wrong, then I also take as an individual the full accountability and responsibility for that, and have the guts to kind of say, yeah, I was wrong, and but we are going to still believe that the vision is the right. We will find another path and another way to go. And I think that's also, I guess, also is going to shape the leadership now for the future. And I can just imagine that in many boardrooms right now there are a lot of different discussions on topics that maybe people were wanting to have, but they didn't happen before. But it has been really triggered with all of the tough, challenging situations that we have come up upon us, both businesses and people. So in the same way as we talked before, the discussions that I guess both you and me and in our families we have had about what's important in life, it's also the same type of discussions from a business perspective. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? What is driving us, and what is really important for us? And I think that's again coming back to that the crisis has kind of also given us that gift to bring these very important topics up on the forefront.
Yeah.
So Michelle, from the bottom of my heart, I really want to say thank you very much for this very engaging and important conversation that we have had. I learned a lot through this conversation together with you, so thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight.